So what am I saying? I'm saying when you know that this was created by the federal government as part of an effort to legitimize a federal project, you look at it slightly differently. Sure, the poverty was real. She is a compelling figure. It was terrible, but it was also intended that the picture capture that. This is not a picture by just a journalist from anywhere, from, say, Look, or, Life magazine. They didn't have Life, I don't think, then. But this is a government project. The poverty is real, but so is the justification of New Deal goals. The RA, this entity, one staffer wrote later of photos like this, our photographers simply could not afford to hammer home anything except the message that federal money is desperately needed for relief programs. Most of what the photographers had to do to stay on the payroll is routine stuff to show what a good job the agencies were doing in the field. Ickes is getting attacked, actually, on all sides for the pickiness with which he reviews his projects, but Ickes soon learns that Roosevelt does not mind. My slowness did not displease him, Ickes writes of Roosevelt. On the contrary, he said to me, I do not want you to move faster. The extra months of the cement and the bricks are extra months that hold the voter's eye, evidence that the candidate is doing something. So by even the end of 1935, Washington is so different it would hardly have been recognizable to the people of the teens or the 20s. The federal government spent $6 billion, double the level of before, and this even before the first Social Security payments, of course. What's germane to us to consider what all these things did? One thing that's germane, we want to ask what the construction is not doing. The construction did not bring the economy back to health. Utilities, for example, are seeing increased use of electricity even during the Depression. They're sort of the equivalent of our internet. They want to grow. They don't mind the business cycle. They'll probably grow through the business cycle most of the time. America needs to be electrified. The operating companies are getting the money. It's in the budgets. But the stocks are in the toilet, doing worse even than the Dow, because Roosevelt is attacking those companies as basically evil because they're from the private sector. The Dow is still in the hundreds, two-thirds down. Unemployment is still bad. It's 19% in March 1936. In this sense, the economy is the forgotten man whom the infrastructure program forgot. But you see what the group work does do. It gets votes. So the president is reaching out to his mythical figure, the forgotten man, spring, summer, fall, 1936, getting close to the election. Toward the end, right near, there's more, you may know some of these. Toward the end, he moves into kind of frenzy about the forgotten man and the spending and reaches out to even those groups he might have neglected before, generates more construction, announces a $2 million expansion at Virginia State College for Negroes. October 26, you know how close that is to Election Day. He tells an audience at Howard University there are no forgotten men and no forgotten races. By the last minutes of this election, he cemented the modern format and his party's position vis-a-vis the forgotten man. The forgotten man is now a group, not an individual. And the job of everyone not in the group is to pay for the larger Washington that pays for the groups. That is the modern political format and the one that will be followed should we do infrastructure programs of our magnitude. There are people who recognize what it meant at the time, and they protested, but the critics were in such a minority, and the spending increases symbolized by those buildings were so convincing. In 1936, and this is the last number I'll say to you, I believe the federal spending moves to 9% of GDP, up from an original 2.5% in 1929. If the gift to the electorate in 1932 was liquor with the end of Prohibition, this spending is the gift now. There is a Republican opponent, but he's a little bit of a weakling. That's Alf Landon. And I say weakling because when you look at what he offered in 1936, it was New Deal light. That's a lesson, I think, for Republicans. So Ickes is, what else? Ickes is curmudgeonly, but he's not corrupt. There's no Hatch Act in those days to preclude officials from using their office for politics. It's clear that the projects are loved, but it's also clear that the administration is buying votes by creating jobs. There's a great paper by Jim Couch of the University of North Alabama where he shows actually the precision of the targeting. Couch found that Roosevelt poured money into his battleground states and gave basically short shrift to his safe states, even some of them in the South, which goes against our cliches on Roosevelt. And the difference in money that they spent was dramatic between the top recipient state and the bottom state, tenfold. Richard Vedder has some data on the employment. Basically, unemployment in this period bounces around between 15 and 20%. But there is 1 month in the year where unemployment gets all the way down to 13.9%. And that month is November 1936. In other words, what do we remember? Roosevelt is at his most popular point, yes, but his 1936 popularity can't all be laid to his radio voice, nor is it necessarily the heroic popularity of an ailing president leading the country in war. That's anachronistic. The war isn't there yet, right? It is the popularity of a leader who has managed to reward his country like no other. That is why Roosevelt took 46 out of 48 states. On election night, the Forgotten Man theme did come back again. There is a forgotten man, a leader of the Progressive National Committee, jokes Governor Landon, the Republican Party. So I like this very much. Yes, you remembered me is what it says. It's the forgotten man saying thank you to the president. So what's germane for us? The first is the speed with which it all happened. When you go from 3% of GDP to 9% in terms of spending, even when the denominator is the Great Depression, it is like moving to the drug heroin after having nothing but tea. The second is there's nothing inexorable about the process. In history books, we always read about Father Coughlin, Huey Long, demagogue, and so on. Huey Long died in 1935, not 1936. The country was a good deal more pragmatic than in some of our books, I discovered when I researched it. Today we think of it all as a long march to government, Hayek-wise, road to serfdom. I think if Roosevelt had more time in business, had really been in business, and had spent more time with business people, maybe looked at some economics, and he had been less of a lawyer, the outcome would have been different. If it hadn't been so hot in the summer of 1935 when they had to pass all those laws without much consideration, if Washington had had more air conditioning and maybe angiograms, they would have deliberated more slowly. And third and last, we can respect FDR's work. We can even like some of the buildings, and we can certainly respect voters' support of it, but we don't have to have false nostalgia about it. Last we can see the damage. I want to remind you that the Dow Jones Industrial Average did not come back from 1929 until 1954. When I was writing this book, I kept thinking actually not of Roosevelt, or even of his forgotten man, but of the first forgotten man and its author, its creator, William Graham Sumner. That seemed a little bit odd because Sumner, the one who talked about the man who pays, had died in 1910. He's a Victorian. But I kept hearing his voice in the background as I'm typing away. And what he said continued to apply both to the 30s but also to our political challenge. Sumner spoke prophetically about the voter who is not included in the interest group. The citizen everyone fails to think about. It would certainly apply what he said to 2008 or 2009. I'll read you his phrase. Sumner spoke of the forgotten voter for whom there is no provision in the great scramble and the big divide. The government is not a good government if it doesn't somehow include that voter as well. Thank you very much.